Welcome back to Link by Golf. I'm your host Ross McGuire. In this week's episode, I'm truly delighted to be joined by Iain Carter. Iain is a fantastic broadcaster who's worked for the BBC for many years, and of late has been the special guest star of the Chipping Forecast podcast. In this episode, we hear from Iain about his life, how he got into golf, all about his work in journalism, and many more stories. So let's go over to the show and hear from Iain. Delighted to welcome to the podcast this week, Iain Carter. Iain, thanks for joining. Really great to see you.
Hi Ross, good to see you too.
Brilliant. And the podcast has got a very simple start, Iain. How did you get into golf? And where are you from?
Well, I got into golf really through my father, who was a club golfer. And it was, back in those days, the 1970s and 80s, I think... I don't know. Well, when I look back at the regime that he had, able to play golf Saturday and Sunday, it was the best way of spending time with my old man, basically. So I can remember vividly him going off to play golf and a 2-wood being left in the garage, and this was at our home in Leicester. My mother was from Scotland, so I think there was a degree of the home of golf being there, even though that she wasn't a player. But he went off to play golf, and he'd left behind a 2-wood in the garage. And I started swinging that in the garden. And I mean, the club was longer than me probably at that time. And I got into fearful trouble for playing with this club. But I said, well, why you went off to play golf? Why wasn't it there? He said, well, I can't hit it. And so that was in the days when a 2-wood was a thing, and
absolutely,
and so he basically realised that he'd need to get me along, and I remember caddying for him as a kid. He was no great player at all, but we had some great times together, and I think that's the biggest thing I've ever got out of golf. I'm not a particularly good player, but I just love the time that you get to spend with people. And, initially that was with my dad and my best mate at school. And so I've played golf since the age of 11. So for the best part of 50 years. So it's been a constant thread there for me.
That's brilliant. And you're talking there exactly about my own experiences as well, Iain, that golf isn't necessarily about how you play. It's the people you meet. And it's really the reason that I put the podcast together and wanted to do these things is to reflect that as well, the people you make connections with, and I just think it's a great sport for that.
It is. It's one of those things. I've taken up paddle in the last couple of years, and I love playing that, and it's a very social thing. You play 4 of you, but unless everyone goes off to the clubhouse afterwards and has a cup of tea or a pint afterwards, you don't really get to know them. Whereas in golf, you don't have to go for the drink afterwards, albeit it's very nice to do so, because you've spent 4 hours together earlier, and you get that opportunity to find out about each other all the way around. And that's again one of the unique selling points, one of many. So that's an oxymoron. It's one of the selling points of the game. And one that I think sometimes just gets a little bit overlooked, but it's just a wonderful way of spending time. You're out in the fresh air, you're meeting new people, or you're seeing old friends. And I think if I was dependent on having to play well to enjoy myself, then I'd probably have given up a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times we can get caught up in these things. You're judging how your day at the golf went by how you played, but actually it's the memories that you build and the people you meet that are the things you truly remember, right?
Yeah, and here's a pertinent story. As I said, my mother was from Scotland. I was brought up in Leicester. I live down south now, so I should really be more English than Scottish, but for some reason I identify much more as being Scottish. I love the Scottish side of my family immensely, and I love going to Scotland. So when the golf journalists we used to have a home internationals competition, and I said, well, the only team I'm going to play for is Scotland. And the last time we played, it was a great sort of couple of days in Turkey. Scotland came out triumphant. My partner, Ewan McLean, who used to work on the Daily Mirror in Scotland, and I just had the best time. And to this day, whenever we see each other, we just say partner. That's it.
Yeah, and absolutely.
That's we don't really see much of each other at all. Sadly, hardly at all now, because he's moved into different areas. And but when we do see each other, the reference point is always going back to that.
Brilliant. And you're touching on journalism there. You've got a long career with the BBC, of course, but what was your path into journalism? How did you get into it?
Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think I did deep down, but I didn't think it would be the kind of life and career that, a lad from Leicester would be able to from a comprehensive school in Leicester would be able to do. But I was doing an accountancy foundation course in my late teens, and I struggled to add up a scorecard. So it was a ridiculous way to be going. And at that time, I was really fascinated by the radio. I loved Radio 1. I was listening to Radio 1 all the time. And I guess really, Ross, I wanted to be a Radio 1 DJ. And that's what prompted me one day to do something completely out of character, which was just spontaneously get on a bus, go into Leicester and see if BBC Radio Leicester had any part-time jobs. And fortunately, they had a youth programme. They invited me in. I quickly identified that there was no sports slot in that program and volunteered to do it. And that was where I got my first taste of broadcasting. And then from there, I knew that was what I wanted to do. And the accountancy went out the window. I think it sacked me before I was going to sack it. But I think we left each other by mutual agreement, shall we say. And I went off and did a newspaper journalism course, and then got a job on a press agency in the East Midlands, and from there worked my way into radio, joined BBC Radio Leicester in 1988 as their sports person, and from there moved on to the BBC World Service for a few years, and from there on to 5 Live in the mid-90s. And then when initially the tennis guy left, and they said, do you fancy tennis? And I didn't really know much about it, if I'm brutally honest, but I learned very quickly and did the tennis for 5 years, which was an amazing experience. Got to see the world in many different places. It was brilliant. And then Tony Adamson, my predecessor as the BBC golf correspondent, announced his retirement. I'd always made myself available to work at the Open and Ryder Cups and those sort of things. So the bosses knew that golf was my biggest sporting love. And I was very fortunate. They offered me a switch from tennis to golf. I jumped at that chance in 2003 and have been doing it ever since.
Wow, because I thought I picked up that you'd covered cricket before the golf, so it was actually tennis.
Yeah, no, I did cricket, which is a huge sporting love of mine. When I was working at the World Service, and got some incredible trips. Went to the West Indies a number of times, covering cricket tours. Went to Southern Africa for big chunks of time. But that all sort of coincided with getting married, and I didn't, as much as I enjoyed the cricket, it was going away for 8-9 weeks at a time. Really wasn't the lifestyle that I was looking for. I do enjoy traveling, but going away for that kind of length of time. So when I went to 5 Live, I didn't really give any indication that I wanted to do cricket. And as I actually did a year of motor racing, which wasn't really my bag. I quite like it, but it didn't really float my boat, if I'm brutally honest. And then the tennis came along. And as someone said to me during that, tennis doesn't go to horrible places, and so
true.
January in Melbourne takes a lot of beating, August in New York, Paris in June, and the various other places that you went for tournaments and Davis Cup ties. I went to Ecuador for a Davis Cup tie, which was just an extraordinary experience. And I just count myself hugely fortunate. Obviously, golf's involved a lot of travel into a lot of different places. Although now, it's either the United States or the Middle East, really. The odd trip to a Solheim Cup in Germany or something like that, and obviously Rome for the Ryder Cup last time. But it's funny how it's concentrated down. Back in the day, I used to go to the Johnny Walker Classic, and you'd go to Bangkok and Delhi and Beijing for that tournament. I remember, and just to go and visit these places and see golf there was just stunning, an amazing way to make a living.
Absolutely. So what was the first big tournament that you covered for the BBC in terms of golf?
Well, the funniest thing was that because I switched from tennis to golf, in 2003, I went to the Australian Open to basically hand over to my successor and show him the ropes, Jonathan Overend. Okay. So we went to Melbourne for the Australian Open, which was my last time at that tournament. And it just so happened that the following week there was a golf tournament, and the week after that there was a Davis Cup tie, which was Great Britain against Australia in Sydney. Right. And the golf tournament in between times was the Heineken Classic at Royal Melbourne. Wow. So it made sense to stay out there for the whole 4 weeks. My family came down, so it turned into a magnificent trip. And for my very first golf tournament as the BBC's golf correspondent, to be at Royal Melbourne, you could say it's all been downhill ever since. So I did that. Peter Lonard won that tournament, I think. Ernie Els was up there. I remember going in to a press conference that Greg Norman gave in the course of that week. And he sat there and he was just so fascinating, so eloquent, so energized. It was one of the most amazing press conferences, pre-tournament press conferences I've ever been to in any sport. And I remember thinking, my God, if all the press conferences in golf are going to be like this, then this is just going to be amazing. And again, it's been all downhill since then. Although, there've been many a Monty press conference and latterly Rory McIlroy, and they're among the very best talkers in sport. So again, a very privileged position to be able to listen to them talking about whatever subjects that the journalists bring up. So that was my first tournament. My first Open as correspondent was at Royal St George's, and my first hole of commentary at that Open was Tiger Woods losing his ball off the first tee and instantly being thrown into a search party for his ball. And I remember ultimately no one found it, or someone found it, I think, a day later. And I remember after that Open, my boss calling me in and saying, yeah, well done at the Open, but just one thing, why couldn't you find Tiger Woods' ball? Because if you had, the publicity would have been amazing.
The story would have been amazing, yeah.
But I failed miserably on that count. I actually got told off by Steve Williams in the course of that search, who told me in no uncertain terms if I was just standing around here talking, because obviously I was broadcasting while I was searching, and he didn't like the fact that I was being distracted by actually having to do my job.
Right.
And he told me where to go, which wasn't the most welcome thing. But I've subsequently interviewed him a couple of times, and he's a really nice bloke. But my very first interaction with him was him telling me where to go.
And he's done a series of podcasts, and I listened to him. Some of the stories he's got are really fascinating.
Oh, amazing.
He gave a real insight into his whole career and journey.
Yeah, what an amazing life to have been that close to so many of the iconic moments in the history of the game, working with Tiger. But also, he worked with Greg Norman, he worked with Fred Couples, he worked with Adam Scott, obviously, and clearly a brilliant caddy and a great raconteur. Really, really good to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it a little bit there, Iain, but how has broadcasting changed over those years that you've been involved? Have you seen a difference in terms of the players and the engagement interactions that you're able to get?
I think it's in many respects it's very similar. When you're inside the ropes and you're commentating, I don't think that role has changed very much at all. And I think, our coverage on BBC Five Live is very similar to how it's always been. And thankfully, we still get that level of investment for the big events like the Open and the Ryder Cup, because it is an expensive process to mount an outside broadcast that size. And we still do it, and long may it continue, because I think it's a form of sports broadcasting that is unique, and very popular with our audience. And I think it, a lot of people say golf on the radio shouldn't work. How can it
somehow
work?
It just does, though.
But it does, and the reason is that radio is the most malleable of all mediums. It's the easiest one to be in the right place at the right time. And if you've got great producers, which fortunately I've always had, and you've got great broadcasters, you can have those conversations on air and off air that make sure you're in the right place at the right time. And you have, those very, very quiet moments people talk about as whispering on the air. We don't really whisper. You have to keep bass in your voice, otherwise it sounds horrible. But you go very, very low. But then once the ball's been hit, you can speak at a normal level. And then when the ball goes in and the crowd go wild, you go up with them as well. And so you have that huge peak there, and you've had the huge trough beforehand, and that rhythm and that sort of mix of sound. And if you can do it so that you hear the ball being struck, and you bring in all the outside noises, whether it's bird song at Augusta or whatever it is, then you do have such an intoxicating mix of sound that I think is, the forte of radio and great radio. And that's why I think it works. And it's, I pinch myself every single time I'm in those moments, that, you've got that privileged position and you've got that opportunity to describe, huge, memorable moments that sit very high in sporting history.
Yeah, and I would say, even from my own experience, maybe sometimes if it's like the end of Wimbledon or even the Open, which I do dedicate a lot of time to, occasionally there'll be situations where I need to drive home or I'm driving somewhere else. And listening to the radio, some of the tournaments, and especially I remember Federer against Nadal, the final that was really, really long.
Yeah.
It's just incredible drama, and you're like just so engaged in it because you're actually
I'll
driving.
Say this
you've got no other distraction.
I'll say this to my dying day. The pictures are better on the radio because we're tapping into your imagination, and imaginations are way, way more powerful than any HD TV screen. And you actually live it while you're doing something else, as you say, driving your car, or you might be mowing your lawn or doing the ironing. We're an accompaniment that is hopefully a distraction that makes something very mundane much more enjoyable, and takes you away somewhere and stimulates that imagination. And that's just the joy of it. That's the beauty of it. And as I say, people say that golf shouldn't work on the radio, but it does, and it does, I think. So it's been great to be a part of that for the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. So in terms of moments that you must have witnessed so many moments, but I'm going to say what's your favourite moment, but maybe just a couple of your best moments that you've witnessed when you've been at these tournaments. I'd love to hear some insight on that.
I think, I did the Goran Ivanisevic Wimbledon final, which was on the Monday.
Yeah.
And that was an incredible thing to describe. And I love doing tennis commentary. I love the rat-a-tat-tat and trying to keep up with a rally. You can't describe it in the way that you do in golf, which is a much more measured kind of broadcasting. But if you can get to the end of a point and get the umpire giving the score and the crowd going wild and get all those mixture of sounds, that's just gorgeous. And there was so much emotion about that Ivanisevic thing, and it's built into a third Monday. And by the end of a Grand Slam, you are really, really shattered. And the last thing you really need is an extra day. So you kind of come in dead beat, but then the adrenaline took over that day. And I fondly remember that. And in golf, I think Martin Keimer holding his putt at Medina to make sure that the Ryder Cup stayed in European hands. And I remember at the end of that day, we had an amazing commentary box overlooking that 18th green. And I could see just a swarm of red, white and blue heading for the exit gates. And then the bright yellow and blue of Europe, just a mass of people celebrating. And then there was a lone figure right down beneath our commentary box who was just jigging away to the ole, ole, ole that was being sung. And I looked down and it was Bernard Gallagher, who had been working with us. And he always wore a raincoat on the course when he was working. And he was in his raincoat and he was dancing away. And you could see how much it meant to him as a former captain and a former player. And it meant so much to every European that was there. And, you know, I don't like to be jingoistic. I don't like to be biased. I like to, if I've got a bias, it's for great play and you know, making the most of that and celebrating that. But, you know, you couldn't help but be sort of swept away by the emotion of that incredible comeback. The other one that really sticks out for me was in 2005 at St Andrews, when I covered the final round of Jack Nicklaus's career. And
of course.
He was like the Pied Piper that day. The crowds just got bigger and bigger around him as he went round St Andrews. And, initially it was a battle to try and make the cut. And then midway through the back nine, it became clear he wasn't going to be there. So this was going to be his final round. And he came up the 18th and he'd given himself probably 8 feet for birdie on the last for a level par round of 72.
Yeah.
And commentating on that, and you just knew, because it was Jack Nicklaus, you knew he was going to hold the putt.
There's no way he's missing this. There's just no way.
Yeah, his last hole in golf was always going to be a birdie, and it was always going to have that symmetry to make sure that he wasn't over par in his final round. And he knocked it in for the 72. And I swear to you, Ross, the roar for that putt was the loudest I've ever heard at an Open Championship. Wow. It was on a Friday. It had nothing to do with the Claret Jug that year. It had nothing to do with the outcome of the championship. But it meant so much to every single person that was there. There was not a seat to be had in all of the grandstands around there. People hanging out of windows down in Golf Place. It was just the most beautiful scene. The sun was shining and he knocked it in. And yeah, I'll never forget that. That was incredible. But as you say, there are so many, you know, and those big moments when people hold putts to win and change their lives is just a brilliant moment every single time.
Absolutely. And then, Iain, it's not just broadcasting. So you're an accomplished writer. You've got 3 books that you've written. What inspired you to get into doing the publishing yourself?
Well, actually, it's 5 books.
5, sorry.
5 books. Oops. Yeah. If I can remember them all. But the first one that I did, I really wanted to have a crack at it. I'll tell you who inspired me to do it. Was Lawrence Donegan, the former golf correspondent of The Guardian, who's subsequently become a really good friend, and of course a bass player for Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, and the Bluebells. Incredible life. And he wrote 4 Iron in the Soul, which is probably the best golf book ever written, I would say. Certainly on the short list. Okay. But he subsequently wrote some great books. No News at Throat Lake, where he worked as a cub reporter on a tiny newspaper in the Republic of Ireland. California Dreaming, when he worked as a used car salesman. And I just loved the way he wrote. And I can't write like him, but it did make me want to write a book. And in 2010, I had an idea accepted to write about Colin Montgomery's Ryder Cup career, Monty, certainly in the first part of my time as golf correspondent, was the most fascinating guy that I covered. Just brilliant, for all that he, achieved, and then, unable to win a major, but such a Ryder Cup titan, unbeaten in singles.
Just unbelievable, wasn't he? I mean, his record was ridiculous.
Amazing. And he, in a sense, he put it on the line when he took the captaincy in 2010. Could he win the trophy back after it had been lost in 2008? And could he preserve this kind of Ryder Cup legend status as a captain? And so I wrote Monty's Manor, which was basically the story of Monty's Ryder Cup career, right from the start at Kiowa Island all the way through to his captaincy. So that was a great experience. And then I did the 2014 Ryder Cup Showdown, the story of that, and then I did the story of the majors in 2015, which was a really interesting year. And then probably the biggest buzz was to be asked to write the book that celebrated the 150th Open by the R&A. And
Nice.
that was, the Open is my favourite sporting event of them all. And to be asked to do that was an incredible honour. And it's the writing of that, actually, a lot of it took place during lockdown. So it saw me through that very difficult time for everybody. And it was great because no one had anything to do. So people had time to really give you time
for you to try and get interviews and catch up with them
get
as well.
interviews. So I talked to no end of people for that, which was great. And then the most recent book I've done is Golf Wars, which is the story of Liv, the arrival of Liv, and the way that it's turned the men's professional game upside down. And that came out in April last year. And there's hopefully a paperback version is going to come out in time for the Ryder Cup. So we're waiting now to see. It's really interesting because, the book was, as I say, came out in April last year. And honestly, this is not a plug for it. Everything in it is bang up to date. Nothing has changed really. Yes, there've been, a few more people have gone, but the last big defection was, if defection's the right word, was John Rahm, and that's in the book. I get the sense that something is going to happen fairly soon. If Donald Trump is banging the heads together now, he usually gets something to happen. So I'm hoping that happens in time to be able to write an updated chapter for the paperback version. But hopefully what it does is it's not sensational. It doesn't. It collates everything that has gone on to the best of my ability, anyway. And hopefully, anyone who reads it has got an idea of why Liv came into being, how it came into being, and the impact that it's had, and the way that it completely stirred up what is always has been a very traditional and peaceful sport, and it's been anything but, as we all know, for the last 3 or 4 years. So it was really interesting to sort of document that in that edition.
Yeah, and I mean, what do you see as being the impact of Liv? For myself, I guess with these things, it's easy to take sides and jump into one argument or another, but I've just been trying to observe it and understand more about really the players themselves and what their motivations are. I think that's the most interesting thing for me, because if I step back, we all live with the dream of playing golf for a living, or maybe it's football or whatever pursuit. But ultimately, the part there that's probably important is you're doing it for a living, right? You're there to make money, ultimately, to build your life. So I think it's easy for people to judge, but it's not so easy to work out how the players are getting on with it themselves. That's the challenge that I'm observing with it all.
Yeah, I think it's had several impacts. It's obviously brought a heck of a lot more money into the top end of the men's game.
Yeah.
And that's, you see it in the Live tournaments, which are 20 million every time they play. and the PGA Tour has had to stump up and come up with the money to come close to matching that. So it is, and I think that that's had obviously a positive effect on their bank balances, but I think it's had probably a negative effect on the affections of the watching public, who I think absolutely are entitled to say, are these guys really worth that amount of money? I think it's had an effect in terms of, the players who have gone there, how many have become better golfers? I don't think too many have. I think Bryson DeChambeau is an exception there. Brooks Koepka was for a while, but had a pretty poor year in the majors last year by his standards. Yeah. Joaquin Niemann looks a fantastic talent who has done great things while he's played in other events, but he hasn't challenged for a major as yet. And you have to ask the question: had he stayed on the PGA Tour, would he be a better player? Would he be challenging in majors? Tyrrell Hatton is playing amazing golf, and to get himself into the world's top 10 with the limited number of starts that he has in tournaments that qualify for the world rankings is an incredible achievement.
Yeah,
and it doesn't seem to have impacted the standard of his golf playing on LIV. But I think there is a genuine question, and I don't know the answer, but I think there is a genuine question as to whether 54-hole, no-cut, shotgun start golf with limited fields makes you a better player than someone who is in the rigors of playing full field events over 72 holes, having to make cuts. I think that's a tougher finishing school. So I think that the better standard of golf is still with the establishment, but there are exceptions in there, and DeChambeau proved that last year. How does he go this year? That'll be fascinating to see, and how it all shakes down is still a huge question for the game.
Yeah, and I think just looking at and listening to a lot of podcasts on golf, but a lot of people talk about having the best players together all the time, and I think even the top players are getting sucked into that idea. But that's never necessarily been true for many, many years. I think the majors are standing out, and they're standing out because they're unique, that they've got all the best players for 4 tournaments. Fantastic, bring everybody together, but do you really need to see that every week? You don't see it in tennis, for example, where they've got a lot of different competing or not competing tours, but different competing tournaments. And then you look at golf and it's, we need everybody together every week. Well, I don't know if that's true. The European tours get some great events, PGA tours get some brilliant events, and we've seen that most recently the last few weeks especially. You can still have great entertainment without all of the best players in the same field.
No, I agree with you. I think the one event that has really lost out is the Players' Championship.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
It's a hackneyed old thing, but people used to say, well, it's the unofficial 5th major. Well, you can't say that now because you haven't got John Rahm, Cam Smith, Bryson DeChambeau, and Brooks Koepka playing, or Dustin Johnson, or Patrick Reed, or all of those sort of LIV stars who would have been playing in there. And you can't now say that the winner of the Players' Championship has beaten the strongest field in golf. So I think that's a real shame, because I think, it was great to have the players sitting just below the majors and certainly in that March date being there as the precursor to really whet your appetite for the Masters. I think, it would be great to have all of the world's best players coming together around the globe more frequently. You'd want them all there for the playoffs. It would be great. Yeah, and this is pie in the sky because it didn't happen before LIV, and maybe there's a better chance of it happening post LIV or post shakedown from LIV. where you could get all of the best players together in Australia or Korea or South Africa, or the Middle East, but I think it has really helped the majors for them to be able to stand out alone and have that unique calling card, so that when you call it a major, that is exactly, you know,
it really means something.
What it
again,
says on the
it?
tin is what you're going to get. I think the problem is that the majors now, because of the FedEx playoffs and the PGA moving from August to May, it means the major season is just so short.
Yeah, it's so compressed,
and that gap
isn't it?
between the Open Championship and the Masters is such a long time for golf to sustain itself and sustain interest in it and have people, you know, we're watching the early season stuff now, and you see McIlroy win at Pebble Beach, and you go, "Whoa, is this a sign that he's going to win the Masters?" Well, the Masters is 3 months away.
I know.
It's
still a long time.
You know, it's
Anything
still
could happen.
There's so much that can happen between that, and if you don't extrapolate that, what does this mean for the Masters? Then what does Pebble Beach mean? Because again, it's not all of the world's best players. It's 70 players. It's a big win, undoubtedly, but how much does that sustain a wider audience? I think it's questionable, and I think that is a problem for the sport. If the majors were spread out a little bit more in the calendar, then I think that would be a good thing.
Absolutely. So I'm going to shift off the golf a little bit. Iain, you're a Leicester City fan, so
I
brought up
am
in Leicester. I guess that's where the passion came from, but tell me more about your love of Leicester City.
Well, it's Leicester City and Leicester Tigers, I must say.
Okay.
You know, I love my rugby, and you know, I've done rugby commentaries in the past, and I, you know, used to love going down to the Tigers as much as going down to the City. As I say, I live down south now, so I still I managed to get a season ticket for Leicester City for the first time, like what was it, 2 seasons after we won the league. So it was around the COVID time, I guess. So I've got my season ticket. I don't see every match, obviously, because of the amount of travel that I have. I think it's a double-edged thing. I mean, obviously there's never a dull moment supporting Leicester City. You know, we don't much as we would love it this season to just have mid-table security, we never have that. We're either battling relegation or battling for Europe, or in one glorious season winning the league, or we're trying to get promoted, you know, as the sort of yo-yo club that we are. So it's never a dull moment. And you know, you support your hometown team. At least that's what I was brought up to do. And so I love that. And the other thing that I love most about it is that my brother's a season ticket holder. His daughters go. I take my son. My son was born in Kingston upon Thames, but is a mad keen Tigers and City fan. He's got a season ticket with me. So whenever I go, it's a family occasion. We've got mates up there. And, you know, I went up to Goodison Park 2 weeks ago. We were 2-0 down after 5 minutes, 1-0 down after 11 seconds, and it was a very, very long day. I left home at about 7:15 in the morning, and I got home at 10 o'clock at night.
Wow!
And I'd seen my team lose 4-0, and I'd left the game before the 4th goal. And I never leave early, but it was so bad, and yet I got nothing but fond memories of the day, because I went with my brother, we had a few pints, and it's just a brilliant way of relaxing. And the great thing is that I've covered a little bit of football in my career, but only a tiny amount. I don't know anybody at Leicester City. I don't know any of the players. I don't know what they're like in real life, if you like. I'm like any other fan, and I just love that. You know, I could, you know, they always say never meet your heroes. So I don't know what Jamie Vardy's like in real life, but I love him to bits as a footballer. you know, and I don't want to. I don't want to know him. I don't want to meet him. I don't want to. I want to go. I want to shout my support. I want to enjoy the highs and go through the lows, and have a couple of pints before and a couple of pints after, and just, you know, I just think it's a great way of spending a Saturday. So long may it continue. In whichever league we're in.
Maybe when Jamie finally retires, you can just get a game of golf with him instead.
Well, maybe, yeah. Well, you know, that's what the footballers all do, isn't it? They all love their golf. And
then I can't not ask you about the chipping forecast and you being a special guest. So, How did that come around for you?
Well, Andrew Cotter and I did a podcast for the BBC called The Cut for a couple of years, and the cut got cut.
It didn't make the cut,
which didn't make the cut, which was a shame because we enjoyed doing it. And I always, you know, felt that, you know, as we know, there are so many golf podcasts out there, and Andrew during lockdown had done a podcast called the Pepper Pod with Eddie Pepperell.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of a link there, and we managed to just sort of pull it all together, and because it's not a BBC podcast, although it occasionally sits on BBC Sounds, which is great. It meant that because I'm a staff BBC member, I can't be a host on a podcast, but I can be a guest. So I'm the special guest, and that's my role. And my role seems to be to do really bad dad jokes, and
for the crickets,
and which then get the crickets played, and I think that the reason I think the chipping forecast works, and certainly, you know, our audience with what they tell us love it, and I think it's because first and foremost we've got a touring pro who is, I think, probably the most articulate touring pro out there.
It's very open as well.
He's so interesting and so interested, and I think he provides an extraordinarily honest insight into what life as a touring pro is like. And, you know, it's probably our fault, but, you know, in the TCF years, it's been a real struggle for Eddie, and he's lost his card. He's playing on the Challenge Tour, and I feel like our audience are just willing him to turn the corner. And, you know, but in some respects, the fact that it's been such a struggle makes it all the more interesting. And then you've got Andrew, who for me is the best multi-sport commentator in the world, and
absolutely agree with that.
Just a brilliant broadcaster with an extraordinary sense of humour, very quick wit, amazing level of whimsy, and I go on there just hoping I can help a little bit with obviously my insight as a journalist covering the sport. And so apart from the bad jokes that I occasionally crack, I just try to give that journalistic insight into whatever's going on in the game. And so we all come at it from different directions, and then it goes into the mix. We all get on extremely well, and I think that comes through. We make each other laugh, and it's just been a joy to be part of. So again, hopefully it continues and goes from strength to strength.
So any funny behind the scenes moments between you, Andrew, and Eddie?
Well, the problem is that there are lots, and many of them come from remarks made by Eddie that just can't go on a podcast. So we
even
hear
a
them.
podcaster out of bounds.
Yeah, no, we have to. Yeah. So there are plenty, but we had a good one actually this week where Eddie is in South Africa playing a Challenge Tour event this week, and he was speaking. We always do it on Zoom. We're never in the same place together. Yeah. And he was doing it from his hotel room, and his wife Jen is down with him. She's going to be caddying. And she didn't realise that the camera was on, and she was in the bedroom of the hotel getting herself ready to go out.
Brilliant.
And we were talking about something or other, and Eddie said, hang on, I've just got to say that for the benefit of Jen, we are on camera, and so she needs to be very careful, otherwise the footage could go viral. So we had that this week, which did tickle us, and Jen managed to stay out of shot. So that was everyone was happy.
Brilliant. So just getting close to the end here, Iain, what's been the toughest part of your journey in sports journalism?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, look, it's just I find it very hard to moan about anything about my working life. And I think if I did, then I'd probably just get punched, and quite rightly, because I think the way that I describe it to myself is I think intrinsically I'm a fairly lazy character, and I'll find the shortest cut I can.
You're
so
effective,
for me to work
highly
hard,
effective, Iain.
Yeah, for me to work hard, it has to be something whereby it's not hard work to work hard,
right.
And that's my job. I do work hard, but it's not hard work to do it, and because I'm interested in what I'm doing. I love broadcasting, I love writing, and so I'm very, very fortunate there. I think if there is a downside, it is the time that you're away from home. It is, giving up almost entire summers for work. I love playing cricket. I managed to play one game of cricket last year. Wow. I can't, through the best months of the year, I can't play regular golf like my buddies at the golf club do. Yeah. I'll go 3 weeks without touching a club, and everyone says to me, "Oh, but you must get games when you go to these tournaments. You must get a chance to play the course or something like that."
Just jump on Augusta. I'm sure they'll let you on.
Yeah. Right? Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. The days are incredibly long, especially at the majors, and you've got too much work to do, and as you should have. You're not there to go on a golfing holiday. So I am making a big effort this year to take every opportunity I can to play, and to just try and keep the game ticking over, because I do enjoy it, and I enjoy it much more when I'm playing better than the usual rubbish that I have been playing of late. So and of late is like the last 4 or 5 years. So it's that's the trade-off, to have such a fantastic career in terms of what I have to do. You can't have it all, and it means that the toughest part is getting the WhatsApp group and going, "No, I'm sorry guys, I'm away working that week," and and the number of times that I have to write that message is very depressing in that sense. But the quid pro quo is that I'm invariably going to be in the sunshine, and I'm going to be watching golf. So you can't, as I say, you can't have it all.
And speaking of that, any particular tournaments you're excited about that are coming up?
Well, my next one is the Players Championship, which is I always enjoy going there. I think it's it's such a great golf course, so much drama. It's brilliant to do the commentary on that. So we'll be doing that on the Saturday and Sunday on 5 Live, and then before we know it, we're at Augusta, which is fantastic. What I'm really looking forward to this year is the Open at Portrush.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It was sensational in 2019, the last time that we were there, and so I'm hugely looking forward to that. And of course, the Ryder Cup. I think Europe have got a great chance. I think it's going to be. I think this, I'm not sure it's going to be the nicest week. I think it's going to be hostile. I think it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be loud. I think it could get nasty. I hope it doesn't, but I think it could. Yeah. But the journalistic part of me is really looking forward to that, because I think it'll be, with that one. They are going to be great stories, and great stories that will, make the bulletins, will really put golf into the spotlight. And when that happens, then the adrenaline really gets going. And, as a journalist, you'd love those moments. So, I'm looking forward to the Ryder Cup for those kind of reasons. So I think this year, as ever, is going to be a fascinating year. I love the way that the majors line up for Rory McIlroy, who's going to be front and center of it all. If he continues this form, then we're going to be excited about him at the Masters. Can he do it? I don't know. I just don't know. But then an Open at Royal Portrush with so much unfinished business from the miscut last time, and you've got the PGA at Quail Hollow, where he's won 4 times on the PGA Tour. So they, if he's gonna break this 11-year drought in the majors, then you would have to say that this year, and probably the PGA at Quail Hollow, is his best chance, and that will be a huge story. And again, that's what gets the juices flowing. So I think there's a heck of a lot to really look forward to get stuck into. And as I said before, that long period between the last major and the first major it feels like we're nearing the end. You can see that chink of light at the end of the tunnel, and that excites me.
Absolutely. So Iain, thanks so much for coming on. Just wrapping up here, where can people follow you? Of course, on the BBC website, but what about your own Twitter handles and things for folks to catch up?
Yeah, BBC Sport website for regularly write my columns on there. Radio 5 Live, 5 Live Sports Extra, all the majors, all the men's majors, hopefully a couple of the women's as well, should be on there. The Ryder Cup, hopefully, as well. And then got the chipping forecast, which is on all pod providers. And, a weekly dose of varied chat, I think, is probably the best way of putting it. We don't dwell on the golf too long, but then when we get stuck into a golfing issue and Eddie gets into full flow, I really enjoy those moments. But Andrew will take us off in many a weird and wonderful direction as well. So stick with us. We will get to the golf eventually.
And the occasional crickets. So listen, thanks so much for being on.
The crickets for my bad jokes.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers, Ross. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, folks. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll have another episode out soon. Thank you.